Greetings, everyone. This is Al-Fadi, and I'm just so excited, of course, to continue with our discussions here concerning Sharia law with our dear brother Lloyd De Jongh. And last time, I'm sure many of you probably were surprised to discover so quickly that Plato and Plato's Republic had something to do with the development of Sharia and the Caliphate altogether in Islam. No one would have assumed that Plato and by extension Socrates would play any influence into the Islamic Sharia law or the Islamic Caliphate or the Islamic system of ruling. But there you have it. It seems like these connections and these discoveries keep on piling up and showing us the source of many of these information that were adapted into what we call today the Islamic system of law or legal system, as we call it, the Sharia law. Lloyd, thank you so much, as always. And it's fascinating, really, when you brought up Plato and Plato's Republic, how probably many of our viewers are taken aback by that or even shocked to discover these kind of connections. But today, hopefully, you can elaborate further on that connection between Plato and Islam.
All right. Yeah, I'll do my best to simplify. This is fairly text heavy, but hopefully we can just introduce the highlights and show people exactly how this influences Islamic thinking and even the creation of Allah, and possibly how Muhammad, the idea of Muhammad as the perfect man, was derived.
Very good, brother. So take it away, please.
All right. So we ended here on this slide. Now, Al-Farabi is the first important Islamic Platonist, and he attempted to reconcile Platonism and Aristotelianism. An aside, Muslims believed they were reading Aristotle, but what they'd done was they borrowed a source from the Neoplatonists who were interpreting Aristotle according to their own thinking. And so Muslims for a long time thought they were reading Aristotle, but they were not. They were utilizing someone else's thoughts on Plato. So by the same token, they weren't taking Plato per se, they were using people's interpretation of Plato, right? And they took this into Islamic thinking. So Al-Farabi is the scholar in question here. He lived from 870 to 950. He was an Aristotelian, Platonic philosopher, and he becomes wealthy from translation in Baghdad. He builds on Plato's Politeia, and he sketches out the ideal state, the caliphate. And Plato wrote the Republic, and this is how they structured the design for the perfect state, the caliphate. His Greek heritage is visible on even the most basic conceptual level, right? A society, in his account, is an association of human beings collaborating to preserve themselves and to attain their highest perfections, which is a quote that he takes from Plato, the perfect state, right? And without collaboration, man cannot attain the perfection for the sake of which his inborn nature has been given to him. So he's basically paraphrasing Plato here, right? And he's thinking, how do I make this idea of the perfect state to create this empire that we want? And he wants to build a perfect society, perfect kamel, right? And from Plato, he learns that the smallest unit suited to harbor a perfect society is a city, Medina. And smaller associations like villages, quarters, streets, and houses are imperfect. Only larger ones like nations and the union of all the societies in the habitable world can be perfect. And therefore, they have to take over and control the entire world. That is the only way you can have perfection. So the word theology appears for the first time with Plato in the Politeia, and it denotes myths, right? Now, they had to learn everything from the pre-Socratic teachings to the writings and commentaries of Proclus and John Philoponus. So they will be absorbing other scholars into their philosophy. But let's skip this for a moment. Let's move to the next section. All right. Notice we have here, even from various other sources, you'll find that they speak of Averroes, right? Ibn Rushd, very famous Islamic scholar. He integrated Islamic traditions with ancient Greek thought. So there was this merging happening. And they have here Plato's Republic, which exerted considerable influence in the Islamic world and Europe. Now, we know about its influence in Europe, but not within the Islamic world. And this is something we should know. Now, in legitimizing state socialism, and yes, Plato was responsible for the design and development of socialism, his Politeia is aristocratic. It is led by the philosophers who are recruited from the warrior caste. And the term philosophers in the context of Politeia, of Plato's Republic, can be translated as the righteous or the saints. Now, of course, you've got the righteous, you've got the warriors. Now, if you think of Muhammad's companions who were righteous, they had to be warriors. And the Imams are the only philosophers. Remember, we've shown before, philosophy in Islam is illegal for the lay Muslim. It's considered on the same level as magic and witchcraft. So philosophy is entirely illegal for lay Muslims within the Sharia. So, of course, right, we'll skip on this. Now, what's important is this guy, Plotinus. Now, we'll look at maybe where we can see where the idea for Allah came from. Plagiarism from Plotinus. He lived from 204 to 270 AD, more or less. Now, he was a pagan. He had a student called Porphyry who despised Christianity. His writings were widely read and widely known within Augustine of Hippo's time, 5th century, long before Muhammad had his revelations, and Al-Farabi may have borrowed more than just political ideas. Now, Porphyry tells us about Plotinus. He writes a book about Plotinus, and he describes him as a man who lived a divine life. He was more than an ordinary man. He had a divine nature. He possessed every possible virtue. He had the highest moral and spiritual standards. His teachings were regarded as a continuation of the Platonic tradition. He was a paradigm of philosophical perfection. And of course, Plotinus refused to have his portrait painted. Does that remind you of anybody, Al-Fadi?
Of course, yeah. Muhammad, of course, allegedly did not want people painting anything or painting him. Yeah.
Yep. So these ideas can be applied from Plotinus straight to Muhammad. So, and this, we know that this Al-Farabi was a very, very influential scholar within Islam. And of course, so Plotinus, taking a lead from Plato, Plotinus developed a spiritual cosmology, and he designed his thinking, his philosophy of what Allah, God, would look like. All right. Now, of course, these ideas were counted by St. Augustine in the City of God, but let's have a quick look at what we're talking about here. So let's do a high-level comparison between God, Yahweh of the Bible, Plato's idea or Plotinus's idea of what God looks like, and Allah. Let's have a look. Now, in terms of sovereignty, God is a creator. The one, who is the name of the God of Plotinus, is a creator, and so is Allah. In terms of nature, a single being with a complex nature, a trinity, whereas the one is a simple unity beyond being, and Allah is a simple unity of pure will. However, this here also applies to Allah. This can be applied to Allah exactly. There's no reason not to. In terms of action, God is intrinsic, whereas the one is extrinsic. He's a monad. He sits outside the universe, and so is Allah, extrinsic. So therefore, you can see he's different from the Christian God. Can God be known? Through reason and faith. But in Plotinus' idea, within the Neoplatonists from Al-Farabi's transmission, God is knowable only through complete submission. But we also know that in Islam, you have to submit entirely to Allah. You have to submit. Then you've got man's nature is free. In both of these, man is a slave to God. Identical again. Basis for obedience is love to the God of the Bible, mysticism and fear. But now this mysticism, if you look at the Sufis, if you look at the highest levels of scholars, they turn to mysticism that's everywhere within the sources. And of course, lay Muslims fear. Man's will has free will, whereas if you look at jihad, you impose your will on another. If you look at the meaning of deen, it is imposing your political will on non-Muslims. And predestination, Allah meets all of these criteria in this column, as well as the criteria in this column. Then, of course, you have man's purpose to know the creator, whereas in the one, you have to submit to the creator and obey. These are the same again. So, Al-Fadi, do you see a similarity here between this idea of Plotinus, which would have influenced Al-Farabi, in terms of how this guy describes God and the way Islam describes God?
Absolutely. And you can see also the reason why Islam, or at least the followers of Islam, despise the God of Christianity, because he is completely different than the God that they follow. And their God looks almost the same as the one, technically speaking.
The monad, the Gnostic monad, effectively speaking. And is there days of resurrection? Well, Plotinus doesn't speak about that. But so keep that in mind, this similarity in mind. So finally, Shafi. Let's speak about Shafi. We'll deep dive into his life as we go. So during his period, he collects the Hadith and the Sunnah. The fiqh and the ijtihad become a structured formal discipline, but there are still these two schools that differ. Shafi raises Islamic thought to the status of a science. So now suddenly this thinking becomes scientific, science. And he develops a framework to reconcile these two competing schools in Iraq and in Arabia. And he starts to create a way to merge them, combine them. And this is how we now have these 4 different schools. Now you have a framework for merging them. And he's the guy responsible for creating a harmony originally between these 4 separate schools. And this development continues up until the 12th century.
Right.
So I think I'll pause here, Al-Fadi. I'll leave it at that for now. Hopefully that was interesting, but I'll pause here.
Absolutely. And then next time, I'm sure we'll talk about Hanbali school, which is the school that I grew up under. And we'll hopefully you can show also its connection with Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, Ibn Taymiyyah, and also the radical interpretations of many things known as the Salafi school, of course. So
yeah, but it's not radical. You'll find those same interpretations in the Reliance, which is a standard Sunni school, a standard Sunni text. It's just it's.
Yeah, absolutely. When I say radical, I meant it in terms of being true to the text, fundamentalist in their views, and so on and so forth.
Correct.
And, and it evolved over time, without a doubt, obviously, how things became more rigid. But thank you, brother. It's been fascinating, and I'm sure the next episode, when people watch that, they will gain even a deeper knowledge about the development and historical embellishment or development of this school of Sharia. And now people begin to see these founders, the schools of fiqh, those founders of these schools like Shafi'i, Hanafi, Hanbali, Maliki, you name it, and where they come from, their view, the brief about their life, and hopefully soon we'll begin to see some other aspects of these different schools. Until then, have a blessed day, everyone. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel CIRA International and click on the bell so that you receive notifications whenever we publish a new video or go live. I would also like to appeal to you to consider becoming a Patreon patron by clicking the link right below. By doing so, you can give towards the production of these videos. There are also other options for you where you can give to our channel. I thank you from the bottom of my heart.